In the early 18th century, the Caribbean Sea was a theater of conflict and opportunity. Ships of every nation sailed its turquoise waters, carrying spices, sugar, and slaves, while naval patrols sought to protect merchant convoys from the growing menace of piracy. Among the pirates who rose to notoriety was Bartholomew Roberts, known to sailors as Black Bart. His exploits would come to define the era, as he captured more than 400 vessels over a decade of ruthless seafaring. Roberts began his career as a merchant sailor, a role that demanded resilience and a strong sense of navigation. The life aboard merchant vessels was harsh. Long voyages meant cramped quarters, limited rations, and the constant threat of storms. Sailors learned to read the wind and the waves, to manage the sails with precision, and to maintain discipline among crew members to ensure the ship's survival. This foundational training would later prove invaluable when Roberts transitioned to piracy. The turning point for Roberts occurred when a merchant ship he was aboard was seized by a band of pirates. Captured and offered a grim choice, join the crew or be cast ashore on a deserted island, Roberts accepted the first option. His decision was not made lightly. It reflected both a survival instinct and a pragmatic assessment of the opportunities that piracy could provide. Once aboard the pirate flagship, Roberts was forced to confront the reality of life under Black Bart's command. The ship was a floating microcosm of lawlessness, where the crew adhered to a brutal hierarchy and a strict code of conduct that governed every action. The transition from merchant sailor to pirate was marked by shock and resistance. Roberts struggled to reconcile his previous training with the violent demands of piracy. He observed how the crew, though diverse, followed a rigid structure imposed by the captain. This structure was essential for maintaining order on a vessel where discipline could mean the difference between life and death. The crew's adherence to the captain's orders, whether it was to raise the black flag, to prepare cannons for an attack, or to distribute loot, created a sense of purpose amid chaos. Roberts' early experiences aboard the flagship allowed him to learn the mechanics of piracy. He observed the meticulous planning that preceded each raid, mapping out trade routes, timing the movement of naval patrols, and coordinating with other pirate ships to overwhelm targets. The crew's drills were rigorous, and failure was met with swift punishment. The psychological impact of this environment was profound. The crew operated under constant threat, yet their cohesion and shared knowledge of the pirate code enabled them to execute complex strategies with precision. As Roberts became more familiar with the pirate lifestyle, he began to understand the strategic advantages that his new role offered. The pirates had access to a fleet of captured vessels, each bringing additional manpower, armaments, and knowledge of different sea lanes. This network expanded their reach across the Caribbean and the Atlantic, allowing them to intercept lucrative merchant convoys and to forge alliances with other pirate crews. The economic incentive was clear. The spoils of captured ships could be sold for money, sold to local markets, or used to purchase supplies, thereby sustaining the pirate economy. However, the life of a pirate was not without its perils. Naval authorities, particularly the Royal Navy, intensified their efforts to hunt down pirate fleets. Roberts and his crew had to remain vigilant, constantly adapting their tactics to evade capture. They employed surprise attacks, used the cover of fog, and sometimes even masqueraded as merchant ships to lure their targets into ambush. Each engagement required meticulous planning, and the outcome could hinge on a single misstep. The threat of death loomed large, yet the promise of wealth and autonomy drove the pirates to continue their raids. Roberts' eventual rise to command was a culmination of his experience, skill, and strategic acumen. He was elected captain by his peers, a testament to his leadership and reputation. Under his command, the pirate fleet grew in size and influence, capturing more ships and expanding its dominion over the seas. The pirate code he enforced ensured that every crew member understood their role and the consequences of disobedience. This code became a source of stability, allowing the pirates to function as a cohesive unit while operating outside the bounds of conventional law. The legacy of Bartholomew Roberts and his crew extends beyond the sheer number of ships they seized. Their operations demonstrated the capacity for organized resistance against naval powers, and they left an indelible mark on maritime history. The pirate code they followed influenced subsequent generations of seafarers, and the stories of their raids have become part of the folklore that surrounds the high seas. Even today, the name Black Bart evokes images of daring, brutality, and the relentless pursuit of freedom on the open ocean. Bartholomew Roberts understood that survival on the pirate ship depended not only on courage in battle, but also on internal order. The crew he commanded was a diverse assembly of men from various nations and backgrounds, each drawn to piracy by different motivations. Some were escaped slaves seeking freedom. Others were disgraced naval officers, and many were simply sailors fleeing the brutal conditions of merchant ships. Without clear rules, such a volatile group risked descending into constant infighting, which would undermine their effectiveness against naval prey and make them vulnerable to mutiny. Roberts recognized that to maintain his authority and ensure the fleet's longevity, he needed to establish a framework that governed behavior and distributed power fairly. He therefore crafted a set of articles, a pirate code, that outlined the rights and responsibilities of every crew member. These articles were not imposed unilaterally by a tyrant, but were agreed upon through a collective vote, reinforcing the democratic principles that often characterized pirate societies. This process ensured that every man, regardless of his rank, felt a sense of ownership over the laws they lived by. The code addressed critical aspects of life aboard ship, beginning with the distribution of plunder. It specified that the captain and officers received a set number of shares for their roles, while the rest of the crew divided the remaining loot equally. This system aimed to prevent disputes over treasure by making the allocation transparent and predictable, removing the greed that often tore other pirate crews apart. Another vital article prohibited gambling with dice or cards, a common source of conflict that could escalate into blood feuds. Roberts saw how a single game of chance could lead to a brawl that left several men wounded and the ship undermanned. He also strictly regulated drinking, limiting alcohol consumption to certain hours to ensure that crew members remained fit for duty. This was especially critical during watches or when preparing for a sudden attack. The code mandated that lights be extinguished at a specific time each night to promote rest and maintain readiness for dawn raids. Furthermore, it detailed punishments for various offenses with absolute clarity. Theft from a fellow crew member resulted in marooning on a desolate shore or immediate death, while desertion during battle was met with severe consequences, often involving physical mutilation or execution to deter cowardice. The articles also provided a primitive form of social security. They provided compensation for injuries sustained in service, offering a predetermined amount of gold for the loss of a limb or an eye. This provision demonstrated a level of care for the crew's welfare that was virtually unheard of in the Royal Navy or merchant services of the era. By providing a safety net, Roberts fostered a deep sense of loyalty and camaraderie. Additionally, the code regulated the treatment of prisoners, sometimes granting quarter to those who surrendered peacefully. This calculated mercy served a strategic purpose, as it encouraged future targets to surrender without a fight, thereby reducing unnecessary bloodshed and damage to the captured ships. By establishing these rules, Roberts transformed the inherent chaos of pirate life into a structured environment where expectations were clear. The crew knew exactly what was expected of them and what they could expect in return. This predictability reduced internal strife and allowed the pirates to focus their energy on external threats and opportunities. The discipline imposed by the articles did not stifle the spirit of adventure. Instead, it channeled it into coordinated actions that made the fleet formidable. Ships under Roberts, command operated with a precision that surprised their victims, as crews executed maneuvers and boarding procedures with practiced efficiency. The impact of this order extended beyond individual ships to the entire fleet. When multiple vessels sailed together under Roberts' own command, the shared articles ensured consistency in conduct and facilitated cooperation during complex operations. This unity was a significant advantage when facing naval squadrons or attempting to blockade ports. The Pirate Code became the bedrock of Roberts' leadership, enabling him to maintain control over hundreds of men across numerous ships. It proved that even in a life defined by rebellion against authority, a different kind of authority, one based on mutual agreement and clear consequences, could create remarkable stability and success on the high seas. The articles were not merely a list of prohibitions, they were a social contract that held the pirate community together and amplified their collective power against the empires of the world. In the years following his election as captain, Bartholomew Roberts led his fleet on voyages that took them far beyond the familiar waters of the Jamaican coast. The pirate squadron moved with purpose, seeking out the richest trade lanes where merchant vessels carried sugar, tobacco, gold, and enslaved people between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. Roberts understood that success depended not only on the strength of his ships, but also on accurate information about the movements of naval patrols and the schedules of valuable convoys. To gather this intelligence, he relied on a network of informants in colonial ports and on the keen observation of his own lookouts who scanned the horizon for telltale signs of sail. The Caribbean Sea presented a complex maze of islands, reefs, and shifting currents that demanded expert navigation. Roberts and his masters studied the prevailing winds, the trade winds that blew steadily from the east, and the seasonal hurricanes that could destroy a fleet caught unprepared. They timed their passages to avoid the worst of the storm season, often sailing southward toward the Spanish Main during winter when the seas were calmer and merchant traffic was at its peak. When they ventured north toward the Bahamas and the Florida Strait, they remained alert for Royal Navy frigates that patrolled those waters in an effort to suppress piracy. Crossing the Atlantic Ocean required even greater preparation. Roberts occasionally turned his fleet eastward toward the West African coast, where European forts traded goods for gold, ivory, and human beings. These voyages were risky because the distance from friendly harbors meant that any damage to a ship could prove catastrophic, and the threat of encountering a well-armed man of war increased with every league traveled from home waters. Nevertheless, the potential rewards were immense. A single Portuguese slave ship bound for Brazil could carry a cargo worth more than an entire year's plunder from smaller Caribbean prizes. Throughout these journeys, the pirate fleet had to contend with the ever-shifting political landscape of the colonial world. Alliances between European powers were fragile, and a treaty signed in one year could be broken the next, altering the balance of naval power in an instant. Roberts sometimes found temporary advantage when two empires were at war, as the heightened focus on naval combat elsewhere left merchant convoys less protected. At other times, he faced coordinated squadrons sent specifically to hunt him down, forcing his ships to adopt evasive tactics such as scattering in different directions, using false colors to approach a target, or seeking refuge in remote coves where larger vessels could not follow. The pirates learned to read the signs of impending danger. A sudden change in the behavior of coastal birds, the appearance of smoke on the horizon, or the interception of a faint signal lantern could warn of an approaching Navy ship. Roberts encouraged his captains to share such observations during council meetings held aboard the flagship, where decisions about course corrections, attack plans, or retreat were made by consensus. This practice of collective deliberation reinforced the discipline established by his articles, while allowing the fleet to adapt quickly to new information. When the fleet reached a successful hunting ground, the approach was meticulously planned. Roberts favored a tactic in which several of his ships would converge on a target from different angles, limiting the quarry's ability to flee in any single direction. The initial volley often consisted of warning shots, meant to persuade the merchant captain to surrender without a fight, thereby preserving the cargo and reducing the risk of damage to both vessels. If resistance was encountered, the pirates moved in with grappling hooks and boarding axes, relying on the ferocity and experience that had become their hallmark. Each captured vessel added to the fleet's strength, either by being incorporated as a new pirate ship or by being scuttled after its valuables were removed. The process of deciding a prize's fate involved careful evaluation of its seaworthiness, armament, and cargo value. A sturdy hull with good sailing qualities might be refitted and renamed, while a damaged or slow vessel would be stripped of its guns and powder before being sunk to prevent its recapture by enemies. Through these voyages across the Caribbean and Atlantic, Roberts demonstrated that piracy could be conducted with a degree of strategic foresight usually associated with formal navies. His ability to navigate complex maritime environments, to gather and act on intelligence, to shift alliances according to circumstance, and to maintain order among a diverse crew allowed him to remain a formidable presence on the seas for years. The routes he pioneered and the tactics he refined left a lasting imprint on the maritime history of the era, illustrating how a determined leader could turn the inherent lawlessness of piracy into a surprisingly effective instrument of power. The final years of Bartholomew Roberts' career were marked by a series of increasingly daring raids that cemented his reputation as one of history's most successful pirates. His fleet continued to grow in size and confidence, capturing not only merchant vessels, but even smaller naval ships. By the early 1720s, Roberts had captured more than 400 ships, an unprecedented achievement in the history of piracy. This extraordinary success attracted the undivided attention of European naval powers. The British Royal Navy, in particular, realized that traditional methods of dealing with pirates were proving insufficient against Roberts' organized and disciplined fleet. The Royal Navy responded with unprecedented force. A substantial bounty was placed on Roberts at head, and several highly experienced naval commanders were tasked with bringing him to justice, either dead or alive. The pressure mounted as Roberts' activities expanded beyond the Caribbean into the South Atlantic and along the West African coast, where he began targeting Portuguese and Dutch trading vessels laden with gold, ivory, and enslaved people. Each successful capture sent ripples through the colonial administrations, forcing them to reconsider their approach to maritime security. The final confrontation came in February of 1722 off the coast of Cape Lopez in West Africa. Roberts was preparing to capture a Portuguese slave ship when a Royal Navy vessel, the HMS Swallow, appeared unexpectedly on the horizon. The pirate fleet was caught completely off guard, with most of Roberts' ships anchored in the harbor, while he himself was aboard his flagship, the Royal Fortune. The HMS Swallow initially approached under false colors, flying the Dutch flag to deceive the pirates. Only when the warship was within cannon range did it hoist the British colors, revealing its true intentions. The ensuing battle was fierce and chaotic. Roberts' crew fought valiantly, demonstrating the discipline instilled by the pirate code that had governed their operations for years. Cannons roared along the shoreline as the Royal Navy's superior firepower became apparent. Despite the pirates' best efforts, the battle turned against them within minutes. The HMS Swallow's disciplined gun crews and precise targeting overwhelmed the pirate defenses. During the height of the engagement, Roberts was struck by grapeshot from a cannonball while standing on the deck of his flagship. The impact was fatal, killing him almost instantly. According to the pirate code he had established, his body was immediately thrown overboard, rather than allowing it to fall into enemy hands. This act preserved both his dignity and the myth of the pirate captain who would never be captured alive. The surviving pirate ships were either captured, burned, or fled the scene in disarray, effectively ending Roberts' reign of terror on the high seas. The surviving crew members were taken prisoner and transported to the nearest British colony for trial. Most were subsequently hanged for piracy, their fates serving as a grim reminder of the consequences awaiting those who challenged the established order of the 18th century maritime world. Despite his violent end, Roberts' legacy endured in multiple ways that extended far beyond his lifetime. The pirate code he established became a model for organized criminal enterprises across the Atlantic world. His strategic approach to maritime operations, characterized by careful planning and disciplined execution, was studied by naval commanders and privateers alike. The sheer number of ships he captured, more than 400 over a decade, remained unmatched for centuries, solidifying his place in history as the most successful pirate of all time. Stories of Roberts' exploits spread widely through oral tradition, printed ballads, and colonial newspapers. In popular culture, he was transformed from a ruthless criminal into a folk hero who defied the established order of empires. Works of fiction, theater productions, and later films often romanticized his life, emphasizing his leadership qualities and strategic brilliance while downplaying the violence of his operations. The physical evidence of Roberts' career has proven equally enduring. Treasure believed to have been taken by his fleet has never been fully recovered, with some speculating that portions remain buried in remote locations throughout the Caribbean and West Africa. The ships he commanded met various fates. Some were sunk during battles, others were captured and repurposed by naval forces, while a few were renamed and continued sailing under different flags. Yet the impact of his brief but spectacular career continues to be felt in maritime law, naval tactics, and popular imagination. Roberts' death at Cape Lopez marked not only the end of an extraordinary individual's life, but also the beginning of the end for the golden age of piracy. His career demonstrated that even in an era of overwhelming naval power, a determined leader could carve out a place for himself outside the bounds of conventional society. The code of conduct he established provided a rare example of structured organization within an otherwise chaotic environment. His legacy serves as a testament to the complex relationship between order and defiance in maritime history, illustrating how a life built on rebellion could nevertheless establish principles that would outlive its creator.